Preparations for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy in the summer of 1944, started 2 years earlier with the buildup of U.S. troops and supplies in the United Kingdom. Known as Operation Bolero, Allied leaders sought 1 million soldiers capable of carrying out an air offensive in 1942 and an invasion of the European continent by 1943. Commitment to Bolero would wax and wane as the United States allocated resources to major Allied campaigns in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. As early as January 1942, American military cargo started flowing into the United Kingdom through the sea and air. Shipments increased in the second half of 1943. By early 1944, the United States was sending more than 1 million tons of supplies per month to the British Isles in preparation for an invasion of the continent. To centralize control of logistics, a theater-level Services of Supply organization had been established in the European Theater of Operations in May 1942, under the command of Major General John C.H. Lee. This command was redesignated as a Communications Zone, or COMZ, following the Normandy landings in June 1944. The COMZ was similar to today's Theater Sustainment Command, but was even more powerful, as General Lee was also dual-hatted as the Deputy Theater Commander for Administration. The COMZ was subordinate directly to General Eisenhower, the commanding general of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Within the larger COMZ organization were 2 subordinate commands: the Advanced Section Communications Zone, or ADSEC, and the Forward Echelon Communications Zone, or FE-COMZ. Although not identical, ADSEC was similar to a current Expeditionary Sustainment Command, as it moved forward with the armies and provided close support. Continental base sections were under these organizations to support on an area basis and serve as the controlling headquarters for the quartermaster, ordnance, and transportation units in its footprint. Immediately following the initial Normandy landings, the ADSEC took control of logistics and engineer operations on the beaches and landing zones, as well as command of the rear area once combat forces started moving forward. The ADSEC sustainment units would prove critical, since combat divisions, infantry regiments, tank and field artillery battalions had very little organic sustainment capability. The vast majority of supplies and services, especially transportation, came from non-divisional units in the COMZ and ADSEC. Allied planners knew that even if they were able to establish a lodgment in France, the subsequent operations to break out and liberate Europe would fail without responsive, resilient, and continuous sustainment. Developing a logistics network to support operations of this scale was no small undertaking, and the English Channel's notoriously erratic weather only further complicated things. Just weeks after landing, severe storms destroyed Allied infrastructure along the Normandy coast, forcing a 4-day closure of the beaches. Planners had hoped to take Cherbourg immediately after D-Day, but German defenders held out for over 3 weeks and destroyed most of the port infrastructure before surrendering in late June. Without Cherbourg's harbor, sustainers had little option but to send supplies over the French beaches. In July 1944, Allied forces initiated a series of offensive operations designed to break out of Normandy. Operation Goodwood, a British and Canadian thrust, contained Nazi defenders in place, allowing American units as part of Operation Cobra to break through German lines. In response, Adolf Hitler ordered a counterattack in early August near Mortain, France. This effort ultimately failed, trapping the German 7th Army near Falaise. As enemy positions collapsed, Allied forces rushed to exploit the heavy German losses. Although the short lines of communication from Normandy proved manageable at first, once Allied forces initiated their breakout, supply lines began to stretch. Logistics suffered from poor movement control and a lack of storage depots for the rapidly accumulating supplies. Without proper movement control, distribution was haphazard and inefficient. The limited French road network quickly became congested, and desperately needed supplies failed to reach the front. On top of this, the Army lacked sufficient engineer regiments and truck companies to sustain the operational tempo in France.
There are 8 principles of sustainment: integration, anticipation, responsiveness, simplicity, economy, survivability, continuity, and improvisation. The principles of sustainment are essential to maintaining combat power, enabling strategic and operational reach, and providing Army forces with endurance. While these principles are independent, they are also interrelated and must be synchronized in time, space, and purpose.
The sudden success of the Allied breakout further strained sustainment operations as the demand for food, ammunition, and fuel increased dramatically. A single division required 35 tons of field rations per day. On 5 August, 72,000 tons of ammunition was ordered south of the Normandy beaches. A week later, the daily petroleum, oil, and lubricants, or POL, required by Third Army doubled from 300,000 gallons to 600,000 gallons. If mission-essential supplies failed to reach the front, the Allied offensive would be forced to culminate while German defenders were still retreating.
One of the 8 principles of sustainment, responsiveness, is the ability to react to changing requirements and respond to meet the needs to maintain support. It involves identifying, accumulating, and maintaining sufficient resources, capabilities, and information necessary to meet rapidly changing requirements. Through responsive sustainment, commanders maintain operational focus and pressure, set the tempo of friendly operations to prevent exhaustion, replace ineffective units, and extend operational reach.
Men and equipment started to move. 65,000.
Prior to the invasion, officers of the 2-year-old Transportation Corps planned a major exercise to work through the challenges associated with moving massive amounts of supply over the Channel and through France. The exercise sought to simulate the terminal and distribution operations planned for France across a 480-kilometer stretch of the United Kingdom. While scheduled to last several weeks and include truck drivers to cargo handlers, the exercise was ultimately scrapped because of a lack of personnel, equipment, and time. Although unable to test their logistics network with an exercise, sustainment planners knew that supporting an operation of this size required the integrated use of all available transportation assets and countless facilities, depots, and transfer stations.
The Army refers to this as intermodal operations, which is the process of using multimodal capabilities, such as air, highway, rail, and sea, along with various conveyances like trucks, barges, containers, or pallets to move troops, supplies, and equipment through expeditionary entry points and along the network of specialized transportation nodes. Intermodal operations use movement control to balance requirements against capabilities to synchronize terminal and mode operations and ensure an uninterrupted flow through the transportation system.
During the First World War, when armies had limited motorized capabilities, railroads were the primary supply carriers on the European continent. But Americans could not rely on trains in 1944 because Allied air forces had systematically targeted bridges and rail networks to stunt German reinforcements on D-Day. At the time, large-scale aerial supply was impractical, although crucial supplies like Class 1, consisting of food and other subsistence items, and Class 3, POL, were airlifted throughout the campaign with varying degrees of success. Transportation via barge was another option, but this was only possible in areas with waterways and required the use of heavy machinery such as cranes. Preparing for a wide offensive, both the U.S. First Army and Third Army sought depots in the La Loupe area. In late August, the COMZ G4 requested 100,000 tons of supplies be transported to the Chartres, La Loupe, Dreux Triangle by 1 September. There was optimism that a rail line from Laval to Paris could be repaired and used for this massive undertaking. However, understaffed engineer units had not been given enough time to restore the track, so trains were only capable of hauling 18,000 to 25,000 tons under that timeline. This required logistics planners to find another way to move the remaining 75,000 to 82,000 tons of equipment and supplies. With limited time and options, planners turned to motor transportation. Lieutenant Colonel Loren Ayers, Chief of the Motor Transportation Service, Headquarters COMZ, established what would become known as the Red Ball Express. The vehicles for the operation were from the Motor Transport Brigade. The motor transport service was organized with approximately 14 vehicles per platoon, and a company was comprised of 40 vehicles. Red Ball was task organized with 108 companies from the Normandy Base Section and the Advanced Section. Operations commenced on 25 August 1944.
Although labeled sections at the time, the sustainment plan used zones to exercise movement control over convoys that spanned several echelons and crossed numerous unit boundaries. As such, the Red Ball planners executed interzonal operations, which occur outside of a specific transportation organization's boundaries and operate under the area control of multiple headquarters. Interzonal operations allow convoys to execute lengthy and uninterrupted movements as they cross zonal boundaries and transition between movement control teams on an area support basis. Conversely, intrazonal operations occur within a specific transportation organization's area of operations.
The name Red Ball Express originated from a railroad term meaning express freight. Cargo, vehicles, and road signs would all be marked with this symbol. Since D-Day, logistics units had been plagued by a shortage of soldiers because the deployment of combat troops continued to take precedence over service troops. Desperate for 2 soldier driving teams, the Army sought volunteers from combat and non-combat units already on French soil. Cooks and infantry alike answered the call. Others were ordered into service. Experience behind the wheel was preferred, but not essential.
After we'd been bivouacked in the hedgerows of Normandy, trying to buy calvados from any passing Frenchman, sleeping and standing guard in the rain for 2 or 3 weeks, the call came down for truck drivers. Most of the drivers attached to the unit were required to volunteer, but for the rest of us, it was anyone who thought he could drive. Most of the men knew enough not to volunteer for anything at all, but this seemed like a great chance to see the countryside and get the hell away from the unit, and especially the first sergeant.
On paper and in practice, the Army was still segregated. Early in the war, black soldiers were often relegated to non-combat units regardless of their desire to serve at the front. This practice changed over time as the Army needed to meet the heavy demands of a truly global war. The 761st Tank Battalion and 332nd Fighter Group became decorated combat units.
You don't ask who the other pilots are or where their grandfathers came from. You know they're Americans, and that's good enough.
By the summer of 1944, nearly 700,000 black soldiers were serving in the United States Army. The Red Ball recruits joined the truck companies of the Motor Transport Service, which was composed of 73% African-American soldiers in the European theater. The soldiers of the Red Ball Express were a diverse group from all over the United States.
I carried your bag, sir, at Pennsylvania Station.
I went 8 rounds with Mickey Tate in Omaha.
Drove you in a cab once, from the Loop to the north side, Chicago.
Served you boiled beef and dumplings in Tallahassee.
And me? I drove a truck. All over the lot. From the Statue of Liberty to the Golden Gate. But I never thought then I'd be behind a wheel in France, on the Red Ball Express.
Red Ball planners studied the French road network and recognized that many roads were not wide enough to support two-way traffic by large military vehicles, so they created a closed-loop system of one-way travel. Several considerations affected the development of the movement control plan for their area of operations.
Planners assessed the following: the hauling method and technique utilized, the anticipated traffic volume, the condition of the main supply routes, the availability of access roads, and the ability of vehicles to negotiate difficult grades, bridges, tunnels, and terrain.
Officially, the Red Ball route started at Saint-Lô, but drivers were often forced to pick up materials as far north as Cherbourg. Saint-Lô was the traffic control point before convoys wound to the south and then eastward. Red Ball convoys would deliver supplies to U.S. Army depots located between the French cities of Dreux, Chartres, and La Loupe. A convoy support center was established near Alençon because it was the midpoint on the route and could be accessed by both outbound and inbound traffic. Here, drivers could rest, refuel, and conduct unscheduled maintenance before returning to their mission on the Red Ball. The Motor Transport Division operated a mixture of 2.5-ton cargo trucks, commonly referred to as deuce and a halves, 5-ton cargo trucks, and 10-ton semi-trailers. Logisticians advocated extensively for a system of semi-trailers, as their heavy load capacity and the ease by which trailers could be transferred between tractors made them ideal for line haul operations. They estimated maximum efficiency could be achieved with a ratio of 3 semi-trailers per 1 tractor trailer. However, mass production and deployment of the larger trailers was unavailable until later in the war. So, the 2.5-ton cargo truck became the workhorse of the Red Ball Express.
Army doctrine prescribes 2 types of hauls, local in line, and 4 hauling methods: direct haul, shuttle, relay, and hub and spoke. Local hauls are operations in which vehicles can make 2 or more round trips per day based on distance and transit time. A local haul is usually an intrazonal movement. Line hauls are operations in which vehicles cannot make more than 1 round trip per day due to distance, terrain restrictions, or transit time. Line hauls are more frequently interzonal, commonly crossing movement control boundaries. Throughput operations from ports or theater storage areas to brigade support battalions are usually line haul operations. Vehicles typically used for line hauls include tractor-trailer combinations, heavy equipment transporters, and palletized load system vehicles. A direct haul is a single transport mission completed by the same vehicles. It does not involve a transfer of supplies or exchange of equipment, as does hub and spoke. Direct hauls can be used in local or line haul operations. A shuttle is similar to a direct haul. However, it requires the same vehicles to make repeat trips between 2 points to transfer all of the required cargo. This method is commonly used in local hauls. A relay is a single transport mission completed in 1 trip that utilizes multiple vehicles without transferring the load. It involves the continuous movement of supplies or troops over successive segments of a route. It is done by changing drivers, tractors, or both for each segment. Containerized cargo on flat racks increases the effectiveness and efficiency of this system. A relay distribution system will have pre-positioned drivers or vehicles at trailer transfer points, minimizing stationary time for loads. In the hub and spoke method, distribution originates from a hub terminal, such as a logistics support area or division support area, and moves along various routes or spokes to intermediate hubs, such as trailer transfer points. At the intermediate hub, the loaded trailer is picked up by a tractor from the forward echelon and transported to its next destination along a different spoke. The forward echelon tractor brings an empty trailer to the intermediate hub, which is then transported rearward to the terminal hub. The hub and spoke method is the most efficient means of sustaining a large theater because it leverages two-way traffic to push cargo forward while retrograding empty containers and trailers to the rear.
With limited standardization before the Second World War, U.S. Army cargo vehicles were primarily made by General Motors Company, Dodge, and Ford. Of these, GMC was responsible for building the Army's deuce-and-a-half cargo fleet. In France 1944, the 6x6 long-wheelbase CCKW 353 was common. Other body types in the European theater of operation included different versions of the AFK WX 353, described as COE, or cab over engine. COEs could handle specialized bulky pieces of equipment such as Bailey bridges or POL pipeline. Designed for amphibious combat, The DUKW-353 Duck was a watertight cargo vehicle known for its ability to easily transition between land and water. The Red Ball route was a one-way highway that was open only to its drivers. All vehicles on the route had to be clearly marked with red ball discs on the front and rear. For efficiency, convoys were organized with a minimum of 20 vehicles and separated at 55-meter intervals, unless operating in congested areas. The speed limit was set at 25 miles per hour. Convoys were organized into three parts: a head, a main body, and a trail. Convoy commanders on the Red Ball were officers and generally positioned in the trail, while a non-commissioned officer would lead the convoy from the head.
The head is the first vehicle of each column, serial, and march unit. The head is responsible for setting the pace and ensuring the convoy adheres to the scheduled itinerary. The officer or NCO at the head ensures the column follows the assigned route and reports the convoy's arrival at checkpoints along the route. With the head performing these duties, the convoy commander has the flexibility to move up and down the column, enforcing march discipline. The main body follows immediately after the head and consists of the majority of vehicles within the convoy. The trail is the last sector of each march column, serial, and march unit. The trail is responsible for recovery, maintenance, and medical support. The trail officer or NCO assists the convoy commander in maintaining march discipline and may also report clear times at checkpoints. The trail is usually provided a dedicated security element for repairs or recovery that require it to be left behind from the main body.
Aside from switching drive teams, convoys on the Red Ball Express were not permitted to stop except for a 10-minute break that occurred 10 minutes before the hour. Driving teams were expected to be back on the road at the hour mark. After 6 hours of consecutive driving, soldiers were authorized a 30-minute break for chow, but these stops were not to occur in urban areas. In later operations, some Red Ball drivers would rest in the former office of Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, and Nazi Germany's second most powerful man. To meet the massive supply demands, operations were to run around the clock. At night, low-beam headlights were permitted west of the light line, but not allowed near combat zones. Organizing and synchronizing a mission as complex as the Red Ball Express was heavily dependent on maps, an item in short supply in France. This forced sustainment planners to improvise by airlifting 200 tons of maps into theater, and later contracting with Parisian printing presses to mass-produce the much-needed 1 to 25,000 scale maps.
One of the 8 principles of sustainment, improvisation, is the ability to adapt sustainment operations to unexpected situations or circumstances affecting a mission. It includes creating, arranging, or fabricating resources to meet requirements. It may also involve changing or creating methods that adapt to a changing operational environment.
5 days after Red Ball's inception, 132 companies composed of nearly 6,000 vehicles delivered 12,300 tons of supply in 1 day. This feat represented Red Ball's single-day record for tonnage delivered. In spite of this accomplishment, Red Ball was unable to meet its target of 82,000 tons by 1 September. Its mission was extended after rail operations also failed to deliver its quota. By 5 September, the Red Ball Express had exceeded its original goal by delivering 89,000 tons to the La Loupe, Dreux, Chartres Triangle. For the next few months, the Red Ball Express would operate based solely on supply needs at the front.
That's right, sir. We deliver. Everything but babies.
As Allied troops pursued retreating German forces across France, American sustainment units were challenged to keep pace with the demanding operational tempo. Sustaining mechanized units on the offensive required significant amounts of POL. In late August, the U.S. armies in northern France were consuming 800,000 gallons of gasoline per day. That equates to 33,333 gallons per hour. U.S. planners had originally believed that 3 pipelines out of Normandy could be built fast enough to support frontline forces, but this proved unfeasible. By August, work on the 3 pipeline system was canceled, and service units focused instead on the construction of one primary pipeline.
Petroleum supply is planned and executed at the strategic, operational, and tactical levels. It is the management and execution of petroleum distribution from the supply point to the customer and involves the receipt, storage, distribution, quality assurance, surveillance, and logistical planning for bulk and packaged petroleum products. Supply chain efficiency is key to ensuring the force has the petroleum resources needed to provide operational reach, freedom of action, and sustainability. Class 3B, or bulk petroleum, includes fuel and lubricants that are normally transported by pipeline, hose line, rail tank car, tanker truck, or barge, and are stored in tanks or containers having a capacity of more than 55 gallons. Class 3P, or packaged petroleum, includes petroleum, lubricating oils, and chemical products normally packaged by the manufacturer and procured, stored, transported, and issued in containers of 55-gallon capacity or less.
With vehicles in constant need of petroleum at the front, the Red Ball Express began delivering Motor Transport 80 octane, or MT80, and Aviation 100 octane, or AV100. When fuel tankers were unavailable, POL products were transported in 55-gallon drums which weighed nearly 100 pounds empty. POL products were often broken down into smaller portions such as the 1-quart, 5-quart, or 5-gallon oil can, the 25-pound grease pail, and the 5-gallon can known among soldiers as the jerry can. Adopted from a German design, one jerry can weighed 10 pounds empty and 40 pounds full. In 1944, 50 cans could fit in a 1-ton trailer, 250 in a 5-ton cargo space, and 500 fit in a 10-ton semi-trailer. The United States had 12 million jerry cans before D-Day, but because fuel depots were high-value targets for the Germans, and because jerry cans were often strapped to or carried on combat vehicles, sustainers expected to lose 800,000 per month, starting in August and September. By October, quartermaster units were short 3.5 million jerry cans, forcing the War Department to seek production at home and abroad. Red Ball convoys were under standing orders to depart with full fuel tanks and to transport enough gasoline for an entire round trip. To build fuel stores in forward areas, 5 additional jerry cans were added to each logistics package and included on all Red Ball vehicles. No other supply class was given similar priority. From June to December 1944, the Motor Transport Services hauled 423,000 tons of POL, much of which was stored in 5-gallon jerry cans. Liberated by the Allies in late August, Paris became a hub for Allied sustainment. The French capital was a major logistical burden because its rail yards were wrecked and its population now relied on U.S. supplies. On 10 September 1944, the Red Ball Express altered its supply route, extending its lines east of Paris. The extension was significant, as average round trips soon reached nearly 1,000 kilometers. As the lines of communication stretched, sustainment planners looked for ways to improve efficiency and reduce the burden on both Red Ball vehicles and drivers. Unlike Northwest France, Allied bombers spared the rail network east of Paris, and this enabled the expansion of intermodal operations to include transporting supplies by rail. By late September, sustainers had established terminals and transfer points near Vincennes and Fontenay-sous-Bois. At the transfer points, Red Ball trucks would drop their cargo, and under U.S. military supervision, French workers loaded the supplies onto trains for further movement. These intermediate terminals not only improved efficiency, but significantly extended operational reach.
Another of the 8 principles of sustainment, economy, is providing sustainment resources in an efficient manner that enables the commander to employ all assets to the greatest effect possible. Economy may be achieved by contracting for support or using host nation resources in order to reduce or eliminate the use of limited military resources.
Supporting the U.S. First Army in the north and Third Army in the south, Red Ball officially extended its route to Hirson and Sompseu. Unofficially, drivers pushed their movements even further east to Verdun and Metz. This lengthened the round trip to over 1,600 kilometers in order to supply Patton's Third Army.
The road was guarded all the way, but occasionally we'd hit an ambush or get some fire from the air. Everyone knew Patton was depending on us, so we would speed right through. One day, I got to the end of the run, and there was General Patton and his staff waiting. We used to form what we called a human pipeline to offload the cans of gas right to the waiting tank. This day, Patton himself helped unload my truck. When Patton worked, everybody worked.
Extending the lines of communication stretched an already shaky system. During the first phase of the Red Ball Express, drivers operated from the ADSEC into Army areas. However, as the front continued to move east, the second phase required passage through multiple sections of the COM-Z to reach forward areas. Communication failures and poor unity of effort hampered sustainment scheduling and overall efficiency. One after-action report declared orthodox supply procedures had been abandoned.
Here is one battle casualty, a tire with hand stitching. Here is another. This one's injuries were more critical. It too was hand-stitched by a driver. This tire was killed in action.
According to Red Ball plans, military police units were supposed to be stationed in larger towns, controlling traffic and checking cargo. Mandatory traffic control points were to be no further than 80 kilometers apart and constantly staffed. MPs were also responsible for ensuring American drivers were adhering to Army protocol, patrolling the Red Ball Highway, and preventing non-authorized vehicles from using the route. Lacking personnel, the military police units were challenged to meet the demands of the expanding Red Ball Express. First Army, Third Army, and the 9th Air Force did not help matters, as all three used the restricted Red Ball routes without requesting permission. The lack of an adequate MP presence also led to the pilfering of supplies. Under constant pressure to deliver, convoy discipline suffered, particularly in regards to speed limits and maintaining intervals. British soldiers joked that when American convoys approached, it was wise not only to get off the road, but climb a tree as well. The Red Ball Express relied on several other enablers in addition to the MPs. Ordnance units provided maintenance support and dispatched wreckers to clear accidents. The Corps of Engineers conducted route maintenance and route signing in English and French. The Signal Corps installed telephone lines and communication posts along the routes, and the Medical Corps supplied emergency responders and aid stations. Coordination between these units proved difficult. Making matters worse, the units supporting Red Ball often suffered from severe personnel shortages. For example, engineer units were so limited that they were often shuttled between First Army and Third Army. The situation became so grave that the War Department deployed stateside units to Europe to complete engineer training in rear areas. The dearth of engineers slowed construction on France's rail network, which in turn added to the heavy load already being shouldered by the motor transport service.
Maintenance was also a constant struggle for the Red Ball mission. Maintaining tempo required keeping serviceable vehicles on the road and repairing those damaged by enemy action. Today, the Army uses a two-level maintenance system composed of field maintenance and sustainment maintenance. Field maintenance is conducted as far forward in theater as possible, and after repair or servicing, the equipment is returned to the unit. Field maintenance includes maintenance performed by operators. Sustainment maintenance is typically performed by national-level maintenance providers at depots or dedicated maintenance facilities. Once repaired, the equipment or vehicle is returned to the supply system and is only returned to the owning unit by exception.
For several days in September, 27 truck companies, composed of approximately 1,000 vehicles, went without maintenance. On the return route between Chartres and Saint-Lô, no vehicle maintenance support was available at all. The lack of maintenance took a toll on engines and wheels. At one point, American drivers had abandoned 81 loaded vehicles on the side of the road between Vire and Dreux. Ignoring maintenance protocols shortened the lifespan of vehicles, reduced lift capacity, and ultimately threatened future operations. Another challenge for the Red Ball Express was the loading and unloading process. Early on, convoys consisted of 40 vehicles, but a lack of material handling equipment and personnel made loading and unloading so many vehicles far too time-consuming. Even after reducing the size of convoys to 20 vehicles, it generally took from 12 to 40 hours to load all of the cargo. Communications breakdowns frequently led to inefficiencies during the unloading process. Many of the arriving trucks were hastily underpacked or grossly overpacked. Another systemic problem was poorly planned depots and transfer sites, like those in low-lying fields, which meant that empty trucks could enter, but once loaded, they often became mired in mud. Exhaustion and fatigue also took a serious toll on drivers. The grueling round trip to depots near Paris took Red Ball soldiers over 53 hours to complete. The pace was so demanding that even in teams of 2, drivers were known to fall asleep. Accidents were a regular occurrence caused by burnout, speeding, poor road conditions, and collisions with unauthorized traffic.
I don't know of anybody who didn't fall asleep. Every so often, you'd see a truck wander out of the convoy, and somebody would holler, "He's asleep!" The men in the convoys would blast their horns to awaken the driver of the drifting truck. I dozed off once. When you fall asleep in a 2.5-tonner, you release the pressure on the gas feed, and the truck would start to drift back and out of the convoy. I woke up and was down in a ditch heading for one of those cement telephone poles. That's when I heard horns blowing and knew my buddies in the convoy were trying to wake me up. It was hairy at times because you were driving so darn many hours.
Although retreating, German ground and air forces remained a threat to convoys. When delivering to the front, Red Ball drivers might encounter resistance from enemy infantry, artillery, and even tanks. Snipers were also a constant concern. Outnumbered Luftwaffe pilots avoided dogfights against Allied squadrons, but targeted supply lines whenever possible. In spite of these internal and external challenges, the Red Ball Express delivered crucial supplies day after day. After conducting major operations for 81 days, the Red Ball Express was discontinued because reports indicated that rail and barge facilities were available east of Paris, and the use of liberated harbors, like Antwerp, could shorten supply lines. From 25 August to 16 November, the soldiers of the Red Ball Express hauled more than 400,000 tons at a rate of over 5,000 tons a day. On most days, 900 vehicles would depart toward combat zones, covering 1.5 million ton miles. By Thanksgiving, the Red Ball Express completed more than 121 million ton miles in only a matter of months.
Survivability, one of the 8 principles of sustainment, is the quality or capability of a military force to avoid or withstand hostile actions or adverse environmental conditions while retaining the ability to fulfill their primary mission. This principle was tested during the Army's drive into the German heartland.
The Allied offensive against Germany in the fall of 1944 and winter of 1945 was plagued by difficult weather conditions. An uncharacteristically rainy autumn made shallow creeks nearly impassable, while rivers knocked out roadways and bridges. Flooded fields could no longer be used for storage and supply. This muddied an already complex logistical chain. In mid-December, German forces, desperate to stop the Allied offensive, counterattacked in the Ardennes forest. The surprise attack succeeded in catching the Allies off guard and threatened to alter the momentum in Europe. Logistics would play a pivotal role in the ensuing Battle of the Bulge. When trains failed to meet delivery quotas to the French capital, motor transportation was once more deemed a temporary solution. Known as the Little Red Ball, drivers expedited 100 tons a day of medical, signal, chemical, and quartermaster Class II from Normandy to Paris, beginning on 15 December. The increase of tonnage delivered by the Little Red Ball was partially the result of new protocol. Starting in the summer months, U.S. armies had operated with tonnage allocation restrictions. As greater tonnage arrived in theater, the limits on tonnage allotments were eventually removed. This allowed the 1st and 3rd Armies to requisition and store an ever-increasing amount of supplies near the front. Although winter clothing and supplies were in theater by the fall, transportation of Class II to the front had been slow in order to accommodate the constant demands for the Big Three, Class I, III, and V. As the rainy autumn turned into a frigid winter, logistical demands increased as the overlooked winter supplies had to be rushed forward. While transporting reinforcements from rear areas to Bastogne, convoys became trapped inside the city until the German encirclement was eventually broken. After a month of furious resupply, the Little Red Ball route was terminated on 18 January 1945 because rail networks were finally improved. A Class III pipeline from Antwerp became operational, and the German counteroffensive was defeated. The victory was costly, particularly to the United States Army, which suffered its highest losses of the Second World War. After-action reviews on the Battle of the Bulge argue that Allied losses would have been far worse without the crucial supplies delivered by the Little Red Ball Express. Although less famous than the Red Ball Express, several additional supply routes were also established during the Allied offensive. From 6 October through 31 December 1944, the White Ball Express connected the ports of Le Havre and Rouen with key depots and train transfer points at Paris, Beauvais, Compiègne, Soissons, and Rouen. The Red Lion Express was a combined operation between American and British forces to move 500 tons per day to Belgium for the 21st Army Group. From November 1944 to March 1945, the ABC Express route delivered 250,000 tons of supplies from the port at Antwerp to the 1st and 9th Armies. In the process, the ABC demonstrated how the semi-trailer system was the future of Army supply. With the development of these new routes, sustainers became more proactive and less reactive to the needs of the force.
Anticipation was key to their success. Anticipation is the ability to foresee operational requirements and initiate necessary actions without waiting for higher to issue operations orders or fragmentary orders. Their ability to anticipate the needs of the force was shaped by professional judgment resulting from experience, knowledge, education, intelligence, and intuition. The commanders and staffs understood and visualized future operations, identified the required support, and then acquired the resources and capabilities to best support the operation.
Of all the supply lines after the Red Ball, the XYZ Express route was the most transformative because it validated the power of planning, experience, and execution. One of the last hauls of the war, the XYZ route supported the final offensive into Germany. The name XYZ was devised as part of a three-phase system. Plan X required 8,000 tons per day. Plan Y required 10,000 tons per day. Plan Z required 12,000 tons per day. Although trains were alleviating the stress on motorized transport in eastern France, logisticians anticipated rail networks inside the German border would not be serviceable. To overcome this, the Motor Transportation Service provided 4 U.S. armies with either a Provisional Highway Transportation Division or a Quartermaster Group. Although not divisions in the traditional sense, the 6956th, 6957th, and 6958th Highway Transport Divisions Provisional and the 469th Quartermaster Group were task organized to provide the necessary transportation and sustainment to their respective supported armies. These units were assembled, briefed, and supplied to travel 300 kilometers past the Rhine River. Sustainers prepared to haul 24,000 tons each day. Daily tonnage was expected to decrease slightly as units moved deeper into Germany. Unlike the early days of the Red Ball Express, which often shipped petroleum in 2.5-ton trucks, XYZ had tanker companies capable of delivering 4,000 tons of POL per day. Beginning on 25 March 1945, the XYZ established 4 supply routes from Liège, Durand, Luxembourg, and Nancy. By the middle of April, the U.S. 9th, 1st, 3rd, and 7th Armies were being supplied well inside German territory. Benefiting from its 34 companies of 10-ton semi-trailers, the the 6957th Highway Transport Division Provisional was capable of supplying the Third Army with 10,000 tons of supplies and 1 million gallons of POL per day. The operation was aided by the repair of rail lines west of the Rhine, which alleviated pressure on the convoy system.
Equipped with trains, specialized fuel tankers, and motor transportation units, XYZ was an integrated logistical effort that ensured unity of effort. The deliberate coordination and synchronization of sustainment with operations across all levels of war contributed greatly to the ultimate success of the U.S. forces.
In earlier missions, sustainers had been forced to rush Class 2 and Class 3 to combat zones. During the final offensive, Class 1 supplies reached critical levels as soldiers shared their rations with freed prisoners of war and displaced persons from liberated concentration camps. In 3 months, the XYZ averaged close to 13,000 tons per day, delivering over 870,000 tons. After victory in Europe, the Motor Transportation Service considered the XYZ Express to be one of the most successful operations of the war. The achievements of the XYZ Express would not have been possible without the experience gained during the Red Ball Express. The Red Ball had been a quick fix for unexpected offensive success. It was executed without trained personnel and without the benefit of a large-scale exercise. Operating on one of the longest routes in the European theater, many of the volunteer drivers had no experience in motor transportation. Because of destroyed infrastructure, railroads were incapable of meeting sustainment needs for much of the offensive across France. This breakdown stretched the convoy system to its limits. Sustainment planners learned from the challenges faced by the Red Ball Express and corrected problem areas before XYZ was initiated. Attaching veteran transportation divisions to each army removed the competition for supplies and simplified command and control. The successes and failures of the Red Ball Express provide important sustainment lessons for supporting large-scale combat operations and overcoming the challenges associated with an immature theater of operations.
I moved everything I ever dreamed of.
220,000 gallons of gas in a day, 700,000 different items, 1 million tons of cargo in 3 months. Everything, Mac. Everything the guys in the front lines needed, we moved. The Red Ball Express delivered. I delivered, you delivered.
Who expresses the appreciation and commendation of the Supreme Allied Commander. The success of our recent military operations, he says, depended on the Red Ball Highway for the delivery of vital supplies. When those supplies were most desperately needed, the Red Ball drivers delivered the goods. Congratulations for a tough job well done.